could call on, so he surveyed 22 ships.
We found that more than half of the physicians were not board certified in their field, in any field. That 74% of the nurses and physicians were not ATLS certified in terms of advanced cardiac life support.
His survey also revealed a lack of X-ray machines, ventilators, and other basic medical equipment.
An EKG machine, a ventilator, just to maintain a person's ability to oxygenate and ventilate, was lacking on the ships. The majority of the ships were not able to do a simple blood test to see if they were anemic, if they've suffered a heart attack. It was shocking, but it was also obvious that something needed to be done.
The International Council of Cruise Lines has issued some guidelines that our members comply with that enumerate the qualifications of the doctors and nurses on board, that list the equipment that must be carried as a minimum on board our ships. And we worked out these guidelines with the American College of Emergency Physicians.
We're not asking that cruise ships just adopt guidelines. There needs to be a federal regulatory body that is empowered to oversee that the standard of care is accepted.
The cruise industry has remained unregulated, largely due to the fact that they fly under flags of convenience.
When you're flying a flag of convenience, it means that you are exempt from a lot of the rules that our government would put on you if you were running a cruise ship. There are some restrictions, but there are also a lot of benefits.
But what is beneficial for business is often at odds with passenger safety. Almost all ships sailing from U.S. ports fly under what are called flags of convenience. American ships fly under foreign flags. They are registered abroad and in theory operate under that country's rules.
It makes a lot of sense for a cruise line to not fly the U.S. flag because it's not going to have to pay the same taxes, it's not going to have to adhere to some of the same rules that it would have to adhere to if it were flying a U.S. flag.
The crew does not fall under American work standards, and it makes it more difficult to prosecute all of these cases because they've got these ships flagged in these third world countries.
In addition to making criminal cases more difficult to prosecute, the tax loophole saves cruise lines hundreds of millions of dollars. Critics maintain that cruise lines get all the benefits of being a major U.S. corporation, but at little cost.
Let's take Royal Caribbean as an example. They put the corporation in Liberia. And that's a good place to put a corporation because you don't pay federal income tax here. In fact, it's an American company. They're on the New York Stock Exchange.
Even ships owned by American icons fly foreign flags.
Disney, they're using foreign flags. I mean, the biggest, most prominent, Mom, and apple pie corporations in the United States of America are marketing these cruise lines from bases in the U.S. or headquarters in the U.S. as though these are U.S. ships, U.S. flags, and U.S. laws that apply. It isn't.
Panama is a popular country for foreign flagging, as is Liberia in Africa.
Liberia may have some rules, but I can almost guarantee you they're not going to be as strict as the U.S. rules about reporting a crime on a ship.
In reality, countries like Liberia have little to do with the ships bearing their flags and may take no interest in ensuring that safety rules and regulations are being enforced.
These flags of convenience are set up by countries that are eager for the revenue they get for charging ships to fly their flags. They're not going to get that revenue if they get tough with the ships.
Foreign flagging has helped make cruising affordable, but at what cost? Passengers who feel they have good reason to sue a cruise line are often left without recourse.
It really is not a pleasant experience for most people. I really can't think of any other industry that has as many barriers and obstacles to a person with a legitimate claim fulfilling that claim and getting compensation.
Few passengers bother to read the fine print on their ticket. There are abundant escape clauses, including limits on some compensation payments, and only a 1-year period rather than the normal 3 in which to file a claim. But the rule that discourages most passengers is the requirement on where the case must be heard.
I've had cases where literally everything about the case, including where it happened and all the witnesses, would be in some place like California. But because of the fine print on the back of the ticket, the case had to be filed in Florida.
James Walker, a former cruise line lawyer, knows how the industry operates.
If you, for example, take a case involving a woman who's been victimized, who's been raped on a cruise ship, and you were to file that claim, the cruise line will take scorch-the-earth techniques to defend the case. They will do anything to try to prevent that case from moving forward, such as threatening the attorneys who bring the case with criminal prosecution if you speak to the press, for example.
Sexual assault on board a ship is rarely prosecuted, and all too often the crime is ignored and covered up.
This lawyer explained that the woman went to the doctor and they sedated her and did nothing for this woman on the ship, and provided no potential care to fight off AIDS. They literally just did nothing on it.
James Walker has switched sides to represent passengers. He says eventually the industry settles many cases out of court while insisting on secrecy to preserve their image.
The cruise industry as a whole does not like bad press. They are now touting that they have a zero tolerance of crimes on their cruise ship. I think a more appropriate way to look at it is they have a zero tolerance of lawsuits filed against them by female passengers.
When a crime occurs on a ship, it can and should be reported. The question, though, is what happens to that report? Where does it go to? Who else sees it? To whom is the ship's crew ultimately accountable?
You're dealing with some other country where, at least aboard the ship, there are no police officers, there are no courts, there are no places where criminals get incarcerated. When somebody commits a crime aboard a cruise ship, and if they're an employee of the cruise ship, the very worst thing that they can expect to have happen to them is that in some instances their employer may tell them to go away and not come back.
The ship's captain has a lot of discretion in how to deal with anything that happens, including a crime. And so as a result of that, you have a lot of crimes that may be reported or may not be reported to people back home, which is why you really don't know if cruise ships are safe or not.
The true level of crime remains unknown because the cruise industry is not required to produce crime figures.
I specifically sent a memo to the operations department suggesting that we keep crime figures on board each cruise ship that we had in order that they be collated at the end of a period to see if there were any patterns developing. At least it highlights times of the year and dates, etc., when one can anticipate problems. I never got a response from the memo, ever.
I think it would be a disservice to everyone involved to start collecting statistics on things that are alleged that may not have happened. You know as well as I do that a lot of things happen that don't turn out to be a crime.
They're not really interested in keeping statistics because I think to do that would be, again, inconsistent with the way they're trying to portray the experience aboard a cruise ship, which is something that is worry-free and carefree.
With cruising becoming increasingly popular, cruise ships are getting larger. And cruise critics who want to see stronger regulation are becoming more vocal and more organized.
For their advice, they ignored them.
The cruise line industry is growing, and cruise ships are getting bigger to accommodate more passengers. In July 2000, Celebrity Cruise Lines launched the 91,000-ton The Millennium, and the trend for megaships began. 6 years later, the Freedom of the Seas was launched, Weighing in at an impressive 160,000 ton, 3 times the size of the Titanic, it can accommodate over 4,000 passengers. As the business becomes more competitive, the ships get more luxurious. The Millennium was the first cruiser to include glass-enclosed elevators and the largest spa facilities afloat. But does luxury trump safety? The cruise industry maintains that the sheer scale of these ships makes cruising safer.
If you have an incident on board, you have more of the ship where you can go to as a safe area.
However, critics see bigger, more complex ships as potentially bringing bigger dangers.
Yeah, you're going to a vacation not with a couple thousand people, which is a lot, but with thousands of people. And who knows the background of all those people? And the more you have, the more chance something's going to happen.
These are disasters waiting to happen. I mean, they're pushing the envelope with the size of these ships. A storm, a collision, a wreck, a fire. The rescue potential is going to be very, very difficult.
And as the industry faces what may be an environment that is more difficult to monitor and control, critics are lobbying harder for change.
And we think that the U.S. Congress needs to take action to make these cruise lines accountable.
Ken Carver is founder of ICV, International Cruise Victims, a group of people who have been directly affected by crime, accidents, and poor medical practices on cruise ships. Ken began the organization after his daughter Merrian disappeared from a Royal Caribbean cruise to Alaska. Under sworn deposition, her cabin steward said that for 5 days he reported her missing. He was told to continue to make up her room.
They took her belongings at the end of the cruise, and the steward said to his boss, "What should we do with the items in the room?" He said, "Just put them in a bag and put them in my locker," at which point they got rid of them.
Merrian's disappearance was never reported to authorities. Months passed before the Carvers had any idea that she'd even been on the cruise.
We investigated the cover-up and everything for like 8 or 9 months. And clearly, all the information was covered up concerning Merrian.
Carnival ships are equipped with security cameras, a fact the Carvers hoped would shed light on their daughter's disappearance.
We finally got the depositions after spending tens of thousands of dollars. The lawyer asked about video cameras. There should have been video of our daughter. And the lawyer came back and said, "We will object to that question. That's privileged information. We won't disclose what's on the video."
After the mysterious disappearance of 26-year-old George Smith from Royal Caribbean's Brilliance of the Seas, Ken attended a congressional hearing on cruise ship safety, and that changed everything for him.
You know, it was good to have a congressional hearing on it, but I went home and about a week later came to the conclusion one day that, hey, an individual cannot change the cruise line industry. It's impossible. And this problem is much bigger than George Smith or Merrian Carver, my daughter. So I made an intellectual decision. Maybe there's a group of victims out there.
So on January 1st, 2006, with the help of the web, Ken started ICV.
And since that point in time, we now have several hundred members located in 15 countries around the world.
Members tell their own stories and stories of loved ones who are lost. The family of Dianne Brimble reports that the 42-year-old mother of 3 was murdered while cruising aboard the P&O Pacific Sky. Her body was found on the floor of a cabin of 4 men. An autopsy revealed a large amount of a known date rape drug in her system.
And it was 4 years later before it finally came out about Dianne Brimble, this woman that had been raped and died as a result of the process.
Pham and Tran disappeared from the Carnival cruise ship Destiny, somewhere between Barbados and Aruba. Their family says that 4 hours elapsed between reports of the couple's disappearance and a call to the Coast Guard.
They were both in good health, in good spirits. Most of those stories, a month later or 2 months later, everybody would forget. But because Michael was one of the, son Michael was one of the founding members of International Cruise Victim. That story is out there today and is continuing to be read.
ICV lobbies for mandatory regulation of the cruise line industry. What they propose seems simple, and in light of what is spent on luxury, of little cost to the business.
I'd ask that we get independent security force on those ships.
In addition to a security force that is not associated with the cruise line, the lobby proposes that if a crime is reported, the scene be secured, and that when someone is reported missing, immediate action is taken. They propose that all security cameras be monitored. Additionally, they say that cruise lines must be responsible for the quality of medical care aboard their ships. On September 19, 2007, the ICV attended another congressional hearing.
It's time for legislation. It's time for Congress to step in and mandate that specific security procedures be installed on board these cruise lines to protect American citizens primarily, but to protect anyone else who buys a ticket where they are implored to go and enjoy themselves under a safe and fun environment when in fact there's nothing of the kind that's available for them. They go on these cruises at their own risk, and I submit that the cruise industry could take these preventative measures, Chairman Cummings, with a minimum of expenditure in light of the profits they obtain on a yearly basis.
There are members of Congress who are on their side.
We're here at this hearing because the victims didn't believe that they had adequate information. And they also believe, too, that the picture presented about the cruise industry is the things you see on television or the brochures you get in the mail. It's perfectly safe. Everybody's having a great time. And in a sense, it lulls you into thinking that there's no crime on board at all. You can bring your families and your young kids and have them go off on their own. And we understand, yes, you should have some idea that it's like everywhere else, but that's not presented by the cruise industry.
But the cruise line industry is a behemoth, used to doing things their own way, and change may come slowly. In the meanwhile, passengers would do well to remember to read the fine print on their tickets and be careful on board.
And the ships are going to continue to get larger and larger. They've really become like small cities in themselves. But what people need to know is when you go on this small city, there is no police chief, there is no fire chief, there's not really an adequate hospital. So many of these responsibilities are yours.